Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. My name is Jillian Robinson. I'm the Associate Artistic Producer here at Cup of Hemlock Theatre, and today I am joined by the wonderful Ryan Borochovitz, one of our co-artistic producers. Hello, Ryan. How are you doing this evening?
Hello, Jill. I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing all right as well. Thanks for asking. On this episode, Ryan and I have the great pleasure of talking about a new Canadian play, The Roof is Leaking, presented by Pleiades Theatre. It is happening at the Berkeley Street Upstairs Theatre, running from May 2nd to the 18th, 2025. And it is a new play written by Davinder, Malhi, and Sanskruti, Marathe, and directed by Ash Knight. Apologies if we're mispronouncing names. Two young upcoming playwrights, so super exciting there. And we love a new Canadian work donning our stages. Before we dive into a very watery theme, which we'll get to, maybe tiny spoiler there. What liquids do we have with us today? The classic icebreaker. Ryan, what are you sipping on? What's in your cup?
Well, in the spirit of the water that is indeed leaking from the roof and copious references to Niagara Falls, I have water in a glass. And
Nice.
also at the opening night reception, they serve delicious Indian food, which I certainly did indulge in. And now I'm very thirsty. So water feels like the way to go. How about you?
Yes.
What do you have in your
Amazing.
cup?
I am drinking water as well. And my water bottle is my cup of choice for this episode, trying to just stay super hydrated as we hopefully segue into the spring season. Okay, so let's get into it. So the roof is leaking. Ryan, would you like to do a little synopsis before we unpack?
Okay, I want to keep this fairly short for the pre-spoiler section here because there's a lot of points where I could start taking the story that I feel like would really get into spoilers, and it happens a bit gradually that it's hard to tell where. So, very short version. This is about a South Asian Punjabi family in, I think they're in the GTA. Did they ever specify exactly where they are? They mentioned Brampton at one point.
Brampton, yeah, because Mina drove in from London to Brampton.
London
And
to
she said
Brampton.
she has her
Yeah.
lemon ginger candies because she gets nauseous
Yeah, she
driving.
mentioned
Yeah.
Brampton drivers. I didn't recall if that was
Yeah.
specifically
Yeah.
therefore we are in Brampton but yes, so we are in a South Asian area of the GTA. And the inciting incident, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, is that the father of the family very suddenly dies of a stroke. And what we experience throughout this play is the family, particularly the mother and the three children, as well as aunts and uncle, cousin, coping with the fallout of this grief, and emotions and old wounds come to pass. People need to grapple with what this person meant to them, what the loss means to them, how they're dealing with their grief. And ultimately it comes down to the mother, most of all, is the character who really is, it's centered around her grief experience in a way that I could describe more post spoiler, but each of the members of the family have their own reactions to the big decision that she makes in the aftermath of his passing. And we get to experience from there. There's also a leaky roof, as per the title, and maybe there's symbolism there. Who could say? I think that's all I want to say plot description wise, or anything important you feel like should be added at this stage?
No, I think, yeah, you gave us a great sort of blueprint, and then we can get farther into it beyond the spoiler shield for sure.
Okay, general appraisals. Would you like to say what you thought?
Yeah, I thought this was a wonderful piece. I thought the way that the cast and the direction choices navigated the space was beautiful. First time I think I've ever seen anything in the Berkeley Street Upstairs Theatre, and how the sort of setting of the house for this piece was sort of in three chunks, like a kitchen, a living room, and sort of like a kitchenette area, or I guess a dining room, a living room, and a kitchen area. And the way that sort of the scenes cascade into one another, waterfall imagery across the boards was super lovely. Me being in this fresh theater space for the first time, I thought like the soundscape and the lighting choices were naturalistic enough, but also amped a little bit to create that sort of like looming presence of grief and familial ambiance needed. Going forward too, we can sort of talk about some of the specific characters and actors, but I think overall, again, this is a new piece. Ash Knight, the director, sort of gave props to both Davinder and Sanskruti for having this be 2 to 3 years. They pumped this piece out. And I'm always a huge advocate of new, fresh Canadian stories. Go out, see, learn, be in community. There was definitely moments where I was feeling very shaken. I, shed tears. Laughter was shared. But again, we'll get into it. Just the family tension and the sort of misunderstanding all amidst dealing with grief, I think was very poignant in this piece. And every actor, I should say, really did good due diligence in making that authentic. Even with some of our characters are a bit over the top or, have moments of being a lot in certain circumstances, there was always a sort of return to groundedness, like in grief, which I think, again, there was a lot of sniffles and wiping of eyes across the audience. This piece is, like you said, specifically highlighting the death of a father of a Punjabi Canadian family, but just family trauma and triggers and, generationally and sibling wise, there's so much relatable content here that I think was shared and executed really well. Yeah. How about you?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you're saying. I think this is a well conceptualized piece, very much a domestic drama in a very familiar sense. The script, I think, in some ways could use a little more finessing and finagling, but I like overall, even some of the things that I think like, ooh, I don't know about that, or I don't know about that. I feel like I'm able to think of a good justification for why. And I think that's like a good sign that like there has been a lot of thought and care put into a lot of this. Even if sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, there's a lot of characters in this. Could those two characters have been merged into one character? Do we need but then I'm like, well, it is a thing that these large South Asian families have a lot of different characters and types of people. And there's an element of authenticity to that kind of thing that I think is fitting. And at any time I kind of think of something like, I'm not sure about that, I feel like the fact that I can provide some sort of justification bodes well for it. I think it could definitely use an intermission, not because I felt like it was too long sitting through it. It's just under 2 hours but with no intermission, but just because there's a very clear break point in the plot where it's like, and this is where the intermission should go. And I think this production would have been well served by allowing us that space to sit and ruminate on the big revelation that leads into that moment, and then let a proper second act feel like a proper second act. But that's a small gripe. Overall, again, there's more things I might want to get into post-spoiler, but I thought it was good, like you said, supporting Canadian works, representing the variety of stories across the Canadian mosaic. Even if we use familiar types of tropes and dramaturgies to do that, every story and culture and family will have its own version of that, and I can definitely get behind and appreciate that.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. I think it's time to put the spoiler bucket up already.
Right. Spoiler bucket.
So we've got a spoiler bucket catching the leaks, and we are going to leak out some spoilers. So stop listening here if you want to catch it. Okay, great. I think I'd like to start with the bucket.
Yeah, go for it.
While we're here in the moisture of it. Yeah. So right off the top, the leak starts from the roof.
Leaking.
Yep. And I thought it was super lovely. Basically it's a blue light that's just consistently dawning stage left. So that was a cool choice there. I guess while we're there, I'm going to shout out the lighting designer, Simran Kapoor.
Yes.
Super lovely choice there. Having it sort of blink to be the dropping, and then having it be kind of just like a stagnant light that's here to stay, basically.
In that same spirit, we should shout out the sound designer as well.
Yes.
Who is Gurpreet Chana. Because there was that constant dripping sound throughout, I think, the entire piece. Maybe near the end, it felt like it stopped right before the big whoosh. Yeah. But just the fact that we had the low hum of, you could tune it out, but it was always there. And every so often you would catch a notice of it. I think that those two elements work very well in tandem with each other.
I mean, again, we could write an essay just on what is the roof is leaking. Yes. But I think right off the top, when we learn so soon in the story that their father has passed away, and then it does become pretty obvious, like 10 minutes into the piece, okay, the soundscape is not going away, and it's a constant sort of like phantom presence. A lot of that, I think, to me, was representing the father, but also representing like the head of the house, but that what happens when there is a crack in the house, i.e. this traumatic thing happens. And it's just this constant also, what next? How do we fix this sort of soundscape, right?
Yeah.
There's constantly something that's leaking. There's constantly something, there's a mishap, and it's how is it going to get fixed? Yeah. I mean, there's way more, but do you want to snowball off some of that?
Yeah, snowballing very much so, because I like what you're saying. I think you're maybe, as an interpretation, rooting it a little more in the actual inciting incident of the father's death than I was kind of thinking of it. Mm-hmm. I viewed the leak as something that certainly precedes the beginning of the play, that it's been there for a while. We see like the water damage and the cracks all over the home, set designed by Jackie Chow. And that like there's clearly a lot of wear and tear and a lot of things that have been neglected, festering, haven't been gotten to. So I was very much viewing this leak. Yes, it's something that needs to get fixed. A repair needs to be made. Maybe it's even an easy repair, as we're often told. But you just let it go, and it builds in tension until eventually it's going to burst. And the climax of this play is not even just like the actual moment where it does burst with Fog Machine representing the water coming down, but
which is a great element.
The entire emotional climax of this piece, which post spoiler we could say now is a mock family kangaroo court divorce proceeding that I'd like to talk more about in a moment. But like this is here we're going to get the explosion, that you've let the tension build up. You didn't make the small repairs while they were small repairs, and now past the point of no return. The problem I kind of have with it, and I'm chewing on what I think about this, because like I said earlier, a lot of the small problems I have with this play are ones I think, oh, there's an explanation for that. And this is one that I'm sure there is, but I don't know what it is yet.
Let's talk about it.
In that final moment, when we have the three siblings after the mother has left to go on her next adventure, and the roof breaks. So it is the finally, oh no, we've let this go by the wayside for so long, and now it's destroying the house, literally. And yet the three siblings huddle together and recite almost a poem, which poetry is an interesting recurring motif about the father's past writing poetry, but reciting a poem about how it's beautiful and it reminds them of Niagara Falls, just like they always went to as a kid. We should go back. And to me, I question how that gels with at least the way that I was interpreting what the leak symbolizes prior to this point, because is the message, quote unquote, message here that there is beauty in the unrepaired tension? I don't know.
This is where I will interject. I do think it's more representative of the father itself than just it being a leak in the house, because also we hear through the many Niagara Falls vacations, they went on specifically because it was almost like the father had an obsession with that vacation, like loved Niagara Falls. So that's why I was like, oh, okay, then absolutely this water leaking and being a constant, like I said, phantom presence, that he is water to me in a way. So I think with that interpretation, what you're bringing up could be a sort of conclusion almost of the siblings paying homage to their father in that final moment. So almost like we are understanding and we are finally coming to terms and accepting, even though it's turning how they've been brought up in their tradition world upside down, their mothers on their next adventure, but through this combustion and this burst of the ceiling, which happens almost directly after the mother leaves the stage. I think it's like they've had their concluding coming to terms with their mother's adventure, and then this final rupture bringing back sort of, and they even say, right, it's resemblant of Niagara Falls, bringing their father back into the forefront, if you will, and them kind of huddling together, sending out a poem in his honor kind of thing. And I don't know, that's kind of how I saw that, because I think too, when it comes to this piece, also deals a lot with generational differences and generational acceptances and generational neglection of things. And I just think there is that sort of limbo phase of there's tradition and there's change and you're accepting of both, but there's that, like, how much do you give to each? And I think like every person goes through this. I don't even think it has to particularly be cultural. I think there's it's that constant sort of, you have to respect the tradition and respect the change, but then those lines can kind of be sometimes blurred or not clear because, right, like also before the leak ends, talk about limbo, you have the mother giving hugs, sending off, she leaves, and then there is that moment of stationary, like all the siblings are stationary at the table, like, wow, this house feels empty, right? There is that sort of empty space before re-enter the father again. And I think in that empty space is what I'm talking about, of like the constant push and pull of tradition and change, and having to kind of sit in that and still, yeah. Am I making sense here?
You
kind
are
of how
making
I'm
sense.
mapping it all out.
Everything you're saying makes sense. I think where I like that as an interpretation, and once again, the things that I'm chewing on, I think there is an answer that does make sense that you can kind of track through. I guess where I don't want to say take issue with that, but where it doesn't quite fully do it for me, or I think maybe there's another pass at the script that could really weave that in a little more elegantly, is that prior to that moment, the leak itself is explicitly framed as a malignant force in the house. It is not framed as something beautiful. Water is beautiful. Niagara Falls is beautiful, but there's never a lamination of the leak being relational to those things or explicitly to the relationship with the father. I don't know. Do you want to?
Well, no, but I think that's also right, because I do think it is still true. Like the mother, like he was a malignant force for her. And also his battle with alcohol, there's another sort of liquid fluid sort of like,
okay, I guess
menacing.
I agree with that there is a malignancy to him, but not exclusively. And the fact that we build towards finding the beauty in this leak, that's not something that like every character thinks, oh, he was just a bastard, and then by the end we realize he's beautiful. There's a whole tug and pull between all of the characters, some who are more sympathetic towards him, some who are less, some that have fond feelings. And every single character, when they acknowledge the leak prior to that very ending moment, sees the leak as a bad thing. It doesn't reflect the way the characters view the father. And I think the best symbols are the ones that you could read entirely on a literal level, or you could read it on a symbolic level, but the two need to map onto each other pretty evenly. That if one tells one story and one tells a different story, then the symbol isn't really functioning as such. Does that make sense?
It does, but I guess I would devil's advocate and kind of argue and talk about this sort of like mismatched pathway of symbolism you're bringing up, of like, that is tradition and change. Like, I'm just saying, like, that similar to the pathway for tradition and the pathway for change are so different. I think it's totally okay that the interactions of each character with the bucket and what maybe the bucket and the leak represent are different, or can be different, because I also think not everyone saw it as quote unquote bad. Even there's a moment when Jazz goes up and she's just holding her hand out and she's realizing that it's not good, but she's not like angry at it, or like, you know, it. I don't know. I think there is justification as to how each character interacts with the leak. A fun kind of not total pivot, but I didn't even realize, this is like a sharing thing. I didn't even realize the cracks in the drywall until like a couple minutes in. So obviously like the leak happens and we know that, and we kind of like that opened up the wounds of the house, I guess, as we'll say. But then it was a moment where I had to be like, wait, are those projections? Because I'm like, how did I not realize the sort of like cracking of the drywall in the corners? Because I saw the family photographs and I saw the like pillows and blankets thrown on the couch. Like I saw the sort of like, you know, family chaos of the space, but I didn't notice those cracks until the like high tension conversation started happening, which was super cool. I'm like, were those there at the beginning? And then they like projections? Yeah, they probably totally were.
No, but that's funny.
But it was like a magic moment that my brain started realizing the cracks when I was like, oh, this family has some misunderstandings or lies, or the bedrock of this family isn't all that it looks like it is, right? And then quite literally the photographs of picture perfect families are holding or hiding punch marks in the walls, like.
So you could say that was the moment when the cracks became apparent to you, like literally in the plot, and then also in the physical environment. It would almost
representing a parent. Like, the dad.
It would almost be cool if, I think they would need a very different kind of budget to make this happen. I don't even know logistically how you would, but if that was like a thing that like actually it looks picture perfect, and then very gradually you don't even notice the cracks did appear, I guess it would have to be through something like projection. Yeah. But that would be interesting as like a design choice. But no, I think it was very.
But I feel like, to be honest, I feel like that might be a little bit too fantastical. Again, what I really loved about this piece is that it was, I can't think of the proper word, like it wasn't predictable. Like every one of our characters wasn't like this is this archetype, this is this person, this like constantly the choices of phrases that some of the characters were using would like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that your character would say that, but that's so funny that they say that. Like, I just feel like it was a very like raw, authentic representation of family members. That sounds so weird, but like how I'm saying that, but definitely wasn't like a predictable, like tied the script up with a fancy bow at all. It was very raw, and I was constantly, I was constantly on a ride with not knowing what was going to be next and not expecting anything, but then, just letting it.
I think what I think is kind of interesting about that is, yes, this play is 100% grounded in realism. The closest we get to a break from realism is that moment at the end when the water does leak and suddenly we're reciting a poem instead of being like, grab more buckets. And I guess it's interesting thinking about previous Pleiades Theatre's productions that we have reviewed on the Cup. Certainly Lesson in Forgetting was kind of very abstract and fantastical all the way through. And even Tyson's Song, while it felt like a realist two-hander drama from most of it, there is the element of the lilac tree. It's been like a year since. Yeah. I think this company is very much attracted to stories that feel like there's a realist basis, but then finds the pops of these types of fantastical elements.
Well, and again, just reifying how theater is the wonderful mechanism to showcase these stories. Like, we could write these stories as a book. We could write these stories as, a lecture, but there is the beauty of theater, or even like a short film, but there is the beauty of these, like you said, popping theatrical moments that sort of elevate it a little bit. Like, it's certainly not magic realism, but it heightened realism, I guess.
I would argue that last moment feels magic realist in a way.
Fair.
Heightened to the point of almost, it is. And I think, that's sort of any like small issue that I do have with the way that's framed and the culmination of that symbol. We are entering a symbolic space where you do kind of have to check your realism at the door, even if it feels like there's been this steady barrier of realism that's prevented that for the over an hour and a half that we've been watching it. To that point.
Do you have any cast shout outs that you want to mention?
So it's a large cast. How about we do 2 each? Does that
sure.
Fair? We'll do
of course.
Well, back and forth, 1 and 2.
Sure.
Okay. So I think the mother, Sandeep, is definitely, she anchors the piece, grounds the whole thing. Strong. Her name is Darini Owolcombe. Again, apologies if we're mispronouncing anybody's name. I thought she was very strong. She's the character I was rooting for from beginning to end. She had very good comedic timing at very like interesting moments, but at its core, this is her story. It's everybody's story. This is a proper capital E ensemble cast where everybody's going through something, but the fact that so much of the drama is built around not just her grief experience, but her grappling with what this relationship meant to her. And specifically, what I said is the moment where there should be the intermission is the moment when she declares that I would like to have a divorce from my dead husband, which feels like an absurd proposition, but it's not a legal proceeding. There's no way that you could actually have a proper trial or court aspect of this. It reminded me kind of the antithesis of when like 2 kids on the playground decide that they're going to get married at recess and they get all their friends together and isn't this adorable, and you can be the officiant and you can be the witness. it's that, but for divorce as opposed to. But what I think this as a plot point in the play, and specifically tying it back to Sandeep's character, it matters to her that it's not about what does this mean for my marital status, for my relationship, but it is for my freedom thereafter, but it is what she needs to do to unshackle herself from the weight of this, and specifically a jury of her peers being the entire assembled family, because these are the people who need to know what she went through, what her life was like, and why we maybe shouldn't be putting the dearly departed, who we must only say nice things about, on the pedestal that death inevitably puts someone onto.
Yeah.
So, and I thought, to bring it back to the cast, shout out that she did an excellent job of making me follow and care about that story.
I thought she portrayed the strength of independence super, super, super well, especially for a character like this and the position she holds in the family. There's a moment, I can't remember if it's Mina that says a comment of like this, but where they mention like her deciding to have this, deciding to separate is like she's bulldozing the family. And I think that is definitely her character is a bulldozer. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I think she's representing a lot of, and that's why I say like, she portrayed the strength of independence, even the way that she sort of took her moments before stating what she wanted. In those moments, there was like this build up of unknown, literally the whole monologue of she doesn't know her favorite color. She doesn't know what she would like to eat. There's this, she doesn't know what independence is. And I just thought the way that she did out finding what that is was super subtle, but very strong, you know? And again, it's the heart, like you said, she's kind of like the heartbeat, the anchor of the piece, right? Which is fun, anchor imagery if the dad is the water, right? So that's like a very...
Yeah, and when she comes out at the end with her hair down and she hasn't made any new discoveries, she still doesn't know what her favorite color is, but she's going to find out. She's literally let her hair down and is ready to embrace what's next. I felt, it was a touching arc that I think she sold very well.
Definitely. All right. Coming back to me, I'm going to shout out Mooney. So played by Harit Sohal. Yeah. Again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name there, but I just thought it was such a fun comic relief pop character. Also, she's the youngest we have on stage. So the most sort of like up with the times of like pop culture. There's many generational tiers throughout this whole family, right? We have, I think, representations at many levels, but she represents, the youngest
high school
age. And there is that sort of like naivete, but also again, that outspokenness in her sort of innocence, but also in her, there's no barrier to her outspokenness like some of the other women on stage may have grown up with, having to sort of abide by that. And again, it's just little pops and little moments. And when I talked about earlier how some of the phrases that come out of these characters' mouths, again, shouting out to our playwrights who created these words, her character has a lot of those where she's like quirky off the top, but then she's very grounded in herself. But again, it's not over the top. Like she provides the comic relief, but also there's a lot more depth to her too. And then she ends up being the judge in our court case with the ladle gavel. And again, I think that's so smart that they make it that character who sort of helms that. If we think this is maybe going to seem like a super deep interpretation, but if, the whole world sort of operates in the present and the now, like the generation that is Mooney's age is kind of the one that is up and coming, but also exuding at the same time. So it just was cool having her as the fulcrum to this court case. Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of where I'll leave that.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you're saying. I was thinking of giving her, she would probably get my next shout out if you didn't already, but like I figured you would. You laughed at like everything she said.
Yeah.
She was a riot. She's everything she says is like either very funny or very insightful. And there's kind of very little middle ground between those two, which is interesting. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to harken back to the intro speech that Ash Knight, he paid a really good compliment to both Davinder and Sanskruti of them being young playwrights and how he was saying in this whole process of putting this piece up and working with the two of them, there was no resistance to change or wanting to listen and hear advice. And sort of, there was the image of, I Sanskruti was like, you know, when you're telling us to eat, like we're going like this instead of just right, you know. And then Ash was like, the fact that they were able to realize that and pivot and change and sort of take advice and go on that journey, like that is wisdom. And so I think that's resonant in the character of Mooney for sure.
Yeah. Wise beyond her years.
Yeah. Who's your second shout out?
Okay, yeah, so Mooney would have been my second, but since you've already shouted her out, I think I'm going to go with the character of Arjun, played by Sarabjit Arora. We've actually seen him before in Tobatek Singh, which we reviewed during this last year's Fringe Festival. And we gave him a very emphatic shout out in that review because what a stage presence he commanded at the center of that piece. But I think Arjun is such an interesting character in this, that he very much represents traditionalism in a lot of way. He is the remaining patriarch who espouses these types of patriarchal values. It is his brother who has passed away, and he feels certainly elements of survivor guilt is the wrong word, but he feels like he owes a debt to his brother that can never be repaid. And as a result, it's really interesting. What I find so fascinating about this character is that one would expect that he would be the one who would be most guarded with his emotions, because that's how we often conceptualize the patriarch, especially one who is maybe suppressing of perhaps non-normative sexualities, as we certainly see with other characters. And he's constantly saying, you're the man of the house, you need to do the man thing. But he is, I think, perhaps one of the characters who's able to access his emotions the most easily. He completely understands that I have these feelings of longing, loss, the very profound relationship he shared with his brother. They came to Canada together with only $20 in their pocket, he says. And he knows that his brother took on great physical abuse on behalf of the family, abuse that we can assume that all three of the siblings probably encountered, but we only specifically hear about it happening to the father. And it's, he has a duty to defend the honor of this brother that he lost. And we are inclined to agree with Sandeep that, he probably wasn't the paragon of virtue that we're hearing him to be from Arjun's perspective, but that doesn't dismiss Arjun's perspective. And culminating in the final moment where he punches the wall, and we see that, the anger is generational. It exists within this family. The one thing, this is more of a playwriting thing than the performance itself, that I kind of grapple with this character is I wish that wasn't the last we saw of him. He punches the wall in a fit of anger, and then we never see him again. Because that it does a disservice to this character who is dealing with these complicated emotions to end on his worst moment, regardless of the broader implications of what that moment represents. I would have liked to give him, if not redemption, at least some kind of closure, allow him to participate in the resolution. People are hugging, we're moving on. I don't see him getting a hug, and I think he needs it more than anyone.
I agree. And I also think I'm getting emotional kind of as we're unpacking this character, because I think especially now in the world with things going on, and again, we're at time of recording 5 years post-pandemic. I think why I'm bringing that up is that wonderful time of isolation augmented a lot of things in our lives. And I think the sort of pressure of the patriarchy in husbands, fathers, brothers, men, providers. Yeah. I feel like we're slowly becoming more finally accepting of men's emotions and creating spaces and allowing that to come up, and doesn't have to be bottled. It doesn't have to be you're the breadwinner. And again, this isn't just a cultural thing. It spans like any man, similar to how we talked about with the character of Sandeep, like taking their moments and then finding that strength. I want to again shout out Sarabjit for really sitting in those moments of like, I am so lost and I just want to be found in this moment, but not knowing like how to break away from the habits that were drummed in, how to voice in an empathetic or sympathetic way. Like there's just was such a loss, and not only a literal loss of brother, but a loss of language, a sort of defeat, a sort of weakness where it's like, no, that's just vulnerability. But to watch a character, and similarly in my life, there's getting personal here, but like men in my life, watching them kind of struggle with accessing their emotions and not realizing that, you know, vulnerability in this whole sort of change and tradition dialogue can exist and should exist. And how do you sort of wade through that? Again, I'll bring some water imagery in here. It was very well done. And then the culmination of that whole moment of him very machismo-ly, sure, we'll make that a word, but punching the wall, right? Like it's this, it's that like there is not knowing how to communicate and being in such a sort of like isolated environment, which I do think a lot of men grappling and struggling with their emotions under the pressure of patriarchy probably do find it very lonely and isolating, because that's basically what they've only known is to be on their own to kind of wade through that. And then ending that with him punching the wall is like, there is work to do, but that is how much frustration and how much angst and sadness that is, that sort of drastic action is the only remedy. But I agree with you. Like, I think some sort of recognition, and maybe it's not like a full cozy hug of like, we hear you or we've got you, but just even having him standing in the space and being around the family post that, maybe not feeling the most comfortable and maybe being a bit standoffish, but still being in the space and being accepted in the space. I think that's where putting on a piece like this, that would make sense to me. But again, like I wasn't angry per se at them leaving his character arc there, but it just would be interesting to see if he was brought back up into the space, like what that would look like, you know, how much attention or little attention would that character receive.
And one thing I just want to add to you kind of bringing up that just the culmination of that tension is him punching the wall. What I think is also so fascinating about this character is the way that, because he deputizes himself to be the ardent defender of his brother's legacy, and we are moments before this explicitly told, like, he's not as good as you think. Let's take down the pictures. Look at what he did. Look at the damage that he wrought. And then to see Arjun do the same thing, I don't see that as just like he lost control of, and here is the anger. Like, this is him in his defense of the genuine goodness that did exist within his brother's personality. He fails to recognize the damage, that he can so easily get to that point where he does the same thing, because it's, in order to accept one, you have to accept the other, or to even be, he can't necessarily see that this is the wrong thing, that I have to, this is just what we do. I respect my brother and this is what he did. So why shouldn't you all respect me for the same reason? Yeah, there's just like so much to unpack there. And
there's that like sort of lineage habitual way of dealing with things that you see trickle down, not only from like father to son, but also siblings to siblings. Like, and it is, like you said, like a defense mechanism.
And we know that their father beat them. So I'm not punching a person, I'm punching the wall. That feels like a better step in the right direction, that I will inflict damage on inanimate objects that can't feel pain, not recognizing that this still makes everybody feel threatened, that it is a violent act, whether or not it's directed at other people, but it's still progress from one generation to the next. And then the next generation knows better, that no, that isn't how you resolve these things, that we use our words, we don't use our fists, even if we're misdirecting it. And then Mooney's generation will take it one step further, and it'll just get better and better as all of this, this generational trickle down effect of morality and problem solving and accessing one's emotions in an attempt at healthy manner. Yeah. There's
it's a
like
waterfall.
It's
and you just said trickle too. We've got all the imagery.
All right. Last cast shout out you want to give? Who you got?
Yeah. There's again.
Yeah, they're all
everyone
good. Everyone's very good.
Stunning so, collectively.
Yes. If we don't shout you out, apologies if we didn't get to you.
I think I want to shout out Tae, like Harpreet Simbi's character, the sort of the sister. I can't remember if she was the older sister or where she sat in the order of sisters.
I don't remember either.
Like the aunt sisters. Like there's the three siblings, right, of the kids, and then. But again, this character kind of comes in a little bit later in the piece, and we very quickly sort of get the flavor that she is an outcast to her sisters, and therefore to the families that the sisters have sort of cultivated. You get the impression sort of hand in hand, side by side. And this sister is, she doesn't come in the traditional attire. She has these lovely earrings that she ends up giving to Gervier halfway through. Like there's definitely a difference of her lifestyle and her choices, even by the way she presents before we hear what that is. Her story is kind of B-plot in the way, because I feel like a lot of it's the mother and the siblings sort of grappling with their father's death that's in the forefront, but we do get a quite heavy foundation, if you will, for Tae of like the fact that she divorced her husband and her husband had cancer, and there was that whole like, he had cancer because you divorced, like she was blamed for her husband's sickness. And then you find out too that they were having fertility problems and she actually was pregnant, but she had a miscarriage. Like, I just feel like there's a lot of heavy memory moments that are uncovered for this like more principal character than even like supporting or lead. And that weight like was definitely not unnoticed. Like I felt like that it was very much, it added, a very necessary layer too, because I know we mentioned like there were a lot of characters in this piece and a lot of sort of stacking on top of conversation that maybe didn't necessarily need to be there, or maybe could have been fleshed out a little bit different. But I feel like this character, for me at least, was I wouldn't do anything to her, because I think it offered like amidst this very like this present traumatic grieving experience that this whole family is going through, this character reminds us that everybody's trauma and struggles and life to get you to a present grief or trauma is going to be like, it's either you're going to bring up your past, it's going to influence your past, it's going to make you rethink the present. Like, and I think by magnifying, like almost having her character's story as a magnifying glass in some moments, created that sort of heartbeat for us. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. I think, and I don't have much to add to that. I think if I want to sum up this character, just an idea, like what is her function in the story? Because like you said, she does come in late. She isn't the most central to the action. When I was kind of in my brain thinking like, oh, do we need all these people? Could two characters maybe have been melded? She's definitely one that I was thinking, about that. But I think what her character represents above all is understanding. She is there to be just a sympathetic presence who she understands. She gets it. She's been through a divorce. She's lost a potential child. She is the first one to listen to Gervier's gender identity questioning and sympathize with him and give him this talismanic item that will help him on that journey. She's just, I am here for you. I will listen to what you have to say. I've been through some stuff myself. Trust me, I get it. And I think it's nice to have someone like that in the story where the characters don't get it a lot of the time.
And I think she represents that beautiful sort of like one foot in and out of this sort of like tradition change pathways I kind of mentioned earlier in the episode, because she has respect for those around her that do upkeep the tradition. Like she doesn't shun, her upbringing in that way, but then she's also confronted and has stared face to face with the changes or the differences that she's faced in her life too. So, and again, I think the sort of like rainbow tie between these two, like you just brought up, is understanding, right?
Yeah,
like
so.
There is tradition, there is change. Both are resonant, both exist, but it's the harmony of that is understanding. Mm-hmm. And I think that character represents that.
Lovely.
Wow. Okay. We love that. Listen, this thing we love about these episodes is not only do we get to like unpack and juicily, sure, dive into new works, but like, again, when we pop out these themes and we just talk, it's like we're constantly learning and relearning. And that is the beauty of theater and live art. And
it's also the beauty of dialogue. You can leave a show and you're like, it was fine. I liked it enough. But then when you talk to someone and unpack ideas, this is what we offer. You get together with someone over a drink and just talk through your thoughts, and maybe you'll make discoveries that you wouldn't have done on your own.
Exactly. And our thoughts may evolve and change and
I hope
expand,
they do.
And that is lovely. Okay. Speaking of lovely, this piece was lovely. Get out to the Berkeley Street Upstairs Theatre May 2nd to the 18th. We look forward to future pieces by Pleiades Theatre. As Ryan mentioned, we've had the beautiful honor of unpacking. I remember like sobbing through the other pieces too. So there's definitely, I said too, there's a resonance that exists with this company and all the pieces that they do. And so definitely go out, support, treat yourself to a new work, and continuously treat yourself to the wonderful theater that is donning our stages across the board. Spring has sprung, and so have every theater company. April and May is always such a busy, wonderful time for many companies' seasons, and we're just so grateful to be a part of so many of it. There's going to be many episodes coming down the way before we hit the summer, and then Fringe happens. There's just lots of goodies to look forward to.
Very much so.
Yeah. So we will pop all information regarding the Rufus linking below. But in the meantime, with the water imagery, we will grab our water cups. Ryan, stay hydrated, folks. Like, go out, treat yourself to live theater, go for lovely walks, and be in conversation with each other. See you next time on The Cup. Bye.